Everybody in that building was totally innocent, had done nothing to anyone.
This was a deliberate act, and I don't think we're often ready to face the intelligence of evil.
I believe that out of this chaos, we're going to raise up something that is worthy of those who lost their lives and worthy of this church and its efforts.
1 year ago, the Murrah Federal Building stood behind me in downtown Oklahoma City. The blast that tore open the front of that building took 168 lives and left much of the downtown in shambles. A year later, buildings like this have yet to be repaired. The blast not only extinguished lives, it also ripped parents from children, spouses from one another, and basically left a community trying to pull its life back together. Even today, rescue workers still struggle with the deep trauma they experienced in their encounter with the barely living and the dying. And many of the survivors are still trying to heal of their wounds. But there is healing here in the heartland. This community is coming back. I'm Bill Turpie. Join me for a look at how Oklahoma City is healing the horror that happened here at 9:02 a.m. on April 19, 1995. In one fiery moment, lives were snuffed out and a community was drawn face-on with an intelligently crafted hell that still resonates today in the lives of people and institutions.
But it lifted the roof and broke out the doors. And also, like our chapel, both windows were just blown in as these were blown in.
The Reverend George Bach is Dean of St. Paul's Episcopal Cathedral, which is 2 blocks from what was ground zero. From the outside, damage to the cathedral doesn't look severe, but the blast ruined even small aspects of the sanctuary and destroyed the roof. Repairs will cost nearly $6 million. Reverend Bach says the insidious effects of the blast carry far beyond the physical damage.
I mean, it goes out, affects people's lives and all sorts of levels and relationships. People who may be downtown on, trying to just get things together and keep them together, and something like this just pushes them over and maybe into an addiction, maybe into some other kind of negative outcome. But it affects people on so many levels.
But I find myself driving by here just to stop and say, okay, this building is really not here anymore, and your husband's never coming home.
The Murrah building was razed last year. Ann Marshall's husband, Raymond, worked in the Social Security office right next to where the Ryder truck was parked. She is an executive with a national agency of the United Methodist Church. She says one of the levels at which the blast has affected her is in terms of her faith.
I have really wrestled with the fact of, where is God in all of this? And I have to really believe and have faith that God is the God of justice, and that no matter how chaotic this event was and the tragedy that it brought, that God is still in control, and that justice will come about, and justice will prevail. I just don't know in what form it will prevail.
Though the Murrah building is gone, many adjacent structures are still in place, deserted in the aftermath of immediate panic. They hold an eerie time capsule of just how powerful and frightening this blast was. Many nearby buildings have yet to be reconstructed.
Well, most of those were small businesses that were thriving on the workforce that was in a number of those buildings that are just no longer there anymore. That workforce is gone.
The disaster has also left its mark on the rescue workers, who spent days trying to find someone left alive in the pancaked rubble. When the bomb first went off, medical and emergency personnel began rushing toward the scene. There was an initial response to get the first wave of survivors to area hospitals, and then hundreds of medical personnel set up and began to wait for the next wave of survivors. The only problem is there was no second wave. Fire Captain Ahmed Rashidi says he still feels a sense of failure.
The last thing I'm going to do, I'm going to find those babies. I'm going to find somebody alive in the midst of all that debris, that rubble, that twisted steel. I felt inside myself that I was going to be the one that found that survivor. And I feel like I failed because there were none. None. and that hurts.
She had this right knee crushed. She had the right ankle severely broken. She had the left knee totally dislocated, severe ligament damage. She had the ankle crushed over here as well as losing the talus bone.
Susan Walton was pulled from the rubble with crushed legs and facial damage. Drowning in her own blood, she was barely clinging to life. A doctor worked feverishly to put a tube down her throat to provide air. But the procedure, called intubation, kept failing. The rules of triage encourage emergency workers to move on, but this doctor persisted.
If it had been later, it might not have been in time to save her life.
What does he say about why he persisted?
He seems to think, that somebody was telling him to stay with the situation at hand and not move on. In his subconscious or whatever you would like to think, something was just kind of keeping him there, focused on her situation.
And there was a medical technician there with him with the things he needed to try to intubate me, so he did.
Susan was one of 600 injured by the blast. She was making a deposit at the credit union in the Murrah Building. Already facing about $750,000 in medical bills, she still needs more reconstructive surgery. They have no health insurance, but like many survivors and the city itself, they feel a force helping them move on. For some, that motivation is directly related to their faith. The Waltons Church has helped raise about $85,000 and provided food and support, sometimes around the clock.
Every time that she has a surgery or any kind of an update, her Brother's Keeper group maintains food or help or anything else that they can do for her. Of course, she's been an inspiration to us just because of her attitude and her ability to pull out of it.
While many have received support from their church or other local organizations, there has also been a tremendous outpouring of concern from around the nation. Over the past year, politicians, performers, and athletes have come to Oklahoma City to participate in memorial services and fundraising efforts to help families and survivors. More than $20 million has been donated so far through a broad range of faith and community groups. On this Sunday, 20 National Football League stars are playing a benefit game to help fund college scholarships for children of the victims.
If there's an opportunity where you have something that someone else could, that you have abundance of, that you could give to someone else who is in need, then you do that. And that's one of the reasons that I'm here. That's where I was raised.
The outpouring of love and sympathy and care for all the people that were involved has just been an unbelievable testimony about the good folks that live in the state of Oklahoma.
That outpouring of concern is strongly reflected at the site of the blast. The intense television coverage etched this event deeply into a nation's heart. This fence is right next to the site of the bombing. People have placed hundreds of makeshift crosses on it, and they have left small mementos, little notes. Many children have left small dolls. This one says, "To the angels from Tom and Evie." There's something here from Pocatello, Idaho, and this is a window on which a man has written, "This Georgia boy will always love you and will never forget you." This ground has become, for many people, a sacred place. The stream of pilgrims is constant. The mementos which hang on the fence are gathered each evening and archived by the Oklahoma Historical Society.
I cry once a day as I read the letters and as I deal with the little animals and as I look at all the other beautiful things. And I think that more than anything else, the story it tells is that it was a nation that mourned, not just a city that mourned.
The story should be about this picture and what God has done with this picture.
Chuck Porter's picture ripped open the nation's heart. The image became a symbol of the human toll of the bombing. Chuck has a deep faith and is an amateur photographer. He was the first on the scene with a camera. The picture won the Pulitzer Prize.
I was just a tool that he used. I have no significance in this whatsoever. And anybody that asks me to take credit for it, I'll say, I'm sorry, I can't. This is not my picture. The minute I took snapped that shutter. That was God's picture, and He has used this from the word go.
Much of the strength and the intelligent caring that has characterized Oklahoma City's response to the disaster lies in its faith communities. Several of the city's historic churches were heavily damaged. In addition to St. Paul's, the blast forced St. Joseph's Old Catholic Cathedral and the First United Methodist Church to find other locations for worship. Trinity Baptist offered the United Methodists the use of their sanctuary for an early service. Dr. Nick Harris, the pastor of First United Methodist, says he and his sound engineer were scheduled to tape a radio program in the sanctuary at the time of the blast, but were delayed.
The skylight fell right where I would have been standing, and the major stained glass window that blew would have blew right into his back. And I looked at that, and that was such a traumatic moment to recognize, and a moment of thanksgiving. But I think what happened is that our people rallied so quickly that they all recognized that we were going to be without a church. And then, of course, this Baptist church called us and told us that they would be glad to share their facility. And, it was just like we never missed a beat.
The church plans to spend $8 million to build a new facility. The shell of the old building will be preserved as a reminder of the past.
Where the evil one did the worst he could do, we're going to do the best we can do. And I believe that out of this chaos, we're going to raise up something that is worthy of those who lost their lives and worthy of this church and its efforts. I just refuse to allow evil to triumph in this.
One act that sowed hope early on to begin to think creatively about restoring several of these damaged churches was initiated by Oklahoma City's Jewish community. Several other faith groups followed suit.
They really didn't know where help was coming from other than their own membership. And so we felt that a quick gift of $10,000 to each of those denominations would sort of set the example and get people moving. And I think it had that effect.
Nationally, the Jewish community has contributed about $1 million to the relief effort in Oklahoma City.
Let your spirit come upon these gifts to make them holy.
The pastor of St. Joseph's Old Cathedral, Father Louis Lamb, says he's been amazed at both the local and national support they've received.
It overwhelmed me, really stunned me, because the Jewish community nationally has contributed $20,000, and the Presbyterians recently gave me a check for $15,000. It's come from all the various denominations.
Allahu Akbar, Allah.
But one faith group that didn't feel much support at first was the Islamic community in Oklahoma.
We felt very fortunate that there was a suspect apprehended real soon, because tension was building. You could feel it on your job.
You did feel it?
Oh, definitely. People started looking at you funny. That was so close to home. It's not like it's over in the Middle East where there's a bombing, or over in Bosnia where there's a bombing. Boom, right here, and you've got the last name that suggests you one of them, meaning one of those Muslims. Yeah, there was a lot of tension.
Dr. Ahmad says the Islamic community of Oklahoma is working with other faith groups to be part of the healing process. The community, along with the Jewish community and other faith groups, have helped fund the Heartland Chapel, located near the bomb site, and they are part of an interfaith effort to help meet the needs of victims.
Where we have a child who lost his parents in the disaster, the grandparents are going to have to take care of him.
Many victims have been helped through a coordinated effort by faith groups and community agencies like these. Every Friday afternoon, the Resource Coordination Committee meets to address needs, ranging from finding apartments to purchasing prosthetic devices.
Instead of somebody that's affected by the bombing having to go and knock on 60 doors, they can knock on one door and know that if they've picked the wrong one, they can't meet the need, that need will be taken to absolutely everybody on Friday. So it's become a one-stop shopping place for anybody that has a need as a result of the bombing.
We finally got the check for the tables.
I think it was
Euler Baker lives just a block from the blast. Her possessions were ruined, and community organizations like those represented in the Resource Coordinating Committee have helped provide everything from food to bedding. She's back in her apartment now, but she has one regret.
if I'd have had the power, I would have given my life for some of the lives of those little kids that was bombed, didn't have a chance. I'm 81 years old, and I feel that I done seen some real good days, and them little kids didn't have a chance. I don't think I'd mind going like that, but it wasn't in my power.
This act, which took both child and adult, has confronted many with issues of faith difficult to answer.
There were a lot of people out there who had a very strong support system that initially helped them through that initial phase. And their expectation, well, now my life should pick up and everything should go back to normal. And that's not occurring. And they're still having difficulty. And some of these people are now coming forward almost a year later and at this point seeking counseling for the first time.
Circle of Care is a United Methodist counseling service which is providing free counseling to victims and rescue workers.
I'm seeing people ask the hard religious questions of their lives. Why? Oftentimes expressing anger at God, anger generally. The faith issues of grace, forgiveness are biggies for them.
Almost anyone in this city can tell you exactly what they were doing when they heard the bomb blast. And many can tell you stories of how they or friends should have been at the building when that bomb went off. But just as many can also tell you stories of how friends did wind up at the building at exactly the wrong moment.
Bob said, Chaplain, I want to tell you something. I said, all right. He said, I have coffee in that building at 9 o'clock every Wednesday morning, and that was a Wednesday morning. But he said, I got up this morning and started to work and had car trouble and had to change cars, and I was at the gas station getting gas when the bomb went off. And I kind of hugged old Bob and said, Bob, I'm glad you weren't there. He wouldn't let me go. He said, Chaplain, that's not all the story. He said, I have 2 grandchildren that are in that nursery. So they woke up this morning with a fever, and Mama kept them home, and they weren't there.
And when the bomb smoke and stuff had cleared away, the building had just disappeared in front of her. Her friend had disappeared, her desk had disappeared, and her chair was sitting there on the edge of where the building had just fallen away. And she was just inches from a falling and being injured or killed herself. And she was sitting there, you know, why did I live and why did she die?
When the smoke began to clear from the building, it wasn't only rescue workers who rushed to the site. Chaplains and pastors also hurried to be present to families and emergency crews as they faced a massive loss of life. Robert Allen was pastor of the Wesley United Methodist Church and served to coordinate about 550 clergy who came to provide pastoral care at the site.
We had ministers who were assigned, some were assigned to go into the building with the rescue squads during the first few days. That stopped when the rescue work got too intense as far as crawling on your belly through very small areas. We had to pull our ministers out because it just wasn't safe for them to be in there. They weren't trained for that kind of work.
But they were trained to respond to the tough questions, like where was God at 9:02 a.m. on Wednesday morning?
God was at the same place at 9:02 that he was at 9:01 and 9:03, because God didn't do this to us. God's presence really became visible, though, in his people, in the presence of his people who came on site and who gave that cup of cold water in his name, who gave that hug, who showed compassion for those who were hurting. And God was seen walking among us with his people.
The chaplains were also present to offer respect for the dead. Father Joe Meinhardt was there when a Marine captain was found under the rubble at his desk.
They boosted me up on the work platform that they had created for this. And we did the rite of blessing the body of a deceased person, the rite of commendation. And then the Marine detail and I walked the Marine to the morgue where we turned his body over to the authorities. And it was a very solemn moment because everyone who was working here just stopped everything that they were doing to honor him and to pray. It was quite an experience.
The trial of those who are alleged to have planted the bomb has been moved out of Oklahoma City. Many want to get this trial moving and over with. There's the belief that healing can't be complete until the needs of justice have been satisfied. But there are also those who say that real healing can't begin until the people affected by this blast have been able to move on to forgiveness. That's an emotionally charged concept, but many experts believe that wrestling with this concept of forgiveness is essential for people to find healing from the bitter emotions unleashed by this act of terror.
This is just a picture of my daughter-in-law. She and my son had brought a wreath to place at the bomb site.
And she lost her father.
Her father was a customs agent.
It's hard to talk to someone in this city who hasn't been affected by the loss of a friend or a loved one. The Reverend Joe Williams is chaplain for the FBI here and head of chaplaincy services for the Southern Baptist churches in Oklahoma.
I will never forget the events of that day and its impact on me, but I must come to a place that I even experience forgiveness, real forgiveness for people. I think one of the great tragedies...
For the perpetrators?
Yes. And I think one of the great tragedies is that we as churches, we as the scouting programs, schools that teach some values, missed the perpetrators of this crime.
How do you deal with feelings toward the people that are alleged to have done this? What is your reaction to them?
I do hope justice is done, and if in some way our system fails, they will get theirs in the end. I have that faith. So either way, we try to stay positive and not really focus on that part of it.
As the Waltons await justice, they are also struggling with this concept of forgiveness.
Well, that's what the good book tells you. You can't go to heaven. That's right. You can't make it to heaven if you have hate in your heart, and that's our goal.
I think many times yes, I can forgive them, and then whenever I have moments of when I really miss my husband, and I know that I'll never have anyone to grow older with, I know that until I can heal, I'm going to have to learn to forgive, and that's going to take a long time. I don't think it's going to happen by April 19th, 1996. It may be several years, but I know that as a Native person, we forgive a lot. And I think this is something that I'm really struggling with now, is to learn the gift of forgiveness.
When I say we've got to have forgiveness, I don't mean that we say, okay, it's okay what you did. Those people that we become bitter at will control our lives, because that'll control every other relationship in our attitudes. And we can't allow people like that to control our lives. So we've got to move on. I mean, our hearts are locked in the past, but we've got to move on.
In this city, there is a powerful and resilient community struggling to pull its life together. It's reflected in its faith community and in many other organizations. For many, this will be a lifelong struggle. But in many ways, Oklahoma City is saying it wants to face that struggle and ride it until the horror is healed. In Oklahoma City, I'm Bill Turpie.